If you say that you must find more love, or more people to love you, or that some specific one must love you, you are assuming the absence of complete love. You are assuming that right now the love you are is not complete, although more love might be added to you in some future block of space or time. You see, again, it would mean that you were incomplete in this little block of so-called time and so-called space. If it seems that you must become more free, perhaps you seem bound in some way. If it seems that you must become more free, you are denying that you are the very presence of infinite, eternal freedom, right here and right now. This would mean that you were blocking the freedom that you are off into so-called space and a block of so-called time. This would be true of any aspect of becoming or attaining that you might assume. You can take this, you can realize this in regard to the word successful or fulfillment. If, for instance, it seems to you that right now your life, your experience is very bleak, but that you can do mental work or in some way make this experience more fulfilling, more complete. Right now you are assuming that right now you are incomplete and that you are bound and you are blocking off your complete freedom into a future block of so-called time. And there is no way, as we said, to measure time. Now we come to a crucial point in this revelation. What about the visible evidence of this completeness? If we have said that God is our life, we have said that God is our health, we have said that God is our mind and our consciousness, and we have said that God is our supply. Now, because we have assumed God to be invisible, not evident, we have assumed our health, our supply, our life, well, all of us, that is really true and genuine, to be invisible. Now, why would this be? It would be because we have gauged everything as visible that seems to be seen through eyes of matter, and that which eyes of matter, so-called, do not see, we have called invisible, that is, not seeable. Now it is true that the evidence is that which is apparent. It's supposed to be apparent to vision, to sight, or perhaps to hearing, or in some other way. But it is true that the evidence that is composed of God, consciousness, spirit, could not be visible to eyes of matter if there were such things. Of course, actually, there are no such things as eyes of matter, for there is no matter. But we can see, believe me when I tell you, that we can see and we can be conscious of the evidence of what we know to be true. Now, this is absolutely true. At any given moment, we can see and be conscious of the evidence of that which we know to be true. We see it as it is. We see the very substance. We see the form. And we know it is spirit. We know it is consciousness. But above all, we know it is our consciousness. Even if it is in form, we know that it is our consciousness in form. Now you might ask, how If we do not see through so-called eyes of matter, how can we see the substance, the form, the actual evidence of perfection that we know to be true? Well, I'll tell you how. We see all of this in and as illumined or enlightened consciousness. We see all of this with the vision that is infinite. It actually is God seeing himself. Now, we actually see the activity. We actually see the omni-action of intelligence in action. And we know it to be the intelligence we are acting intelligently. True it is that to the seeming vision that appears to be strained through born eyes of matter, this evidence of perfection, of wealth, of perfect activity, looks like perfect matter or perfect matter in action. But we know better. We know this evidence of eternal perfection is composed of our own infinite consciousness, and we know that the activity of the evidence of eternal perfection is the activity of our own infinite consciousness intelligently acting. We know our own consciousness is the evidence of the substance called wealth. Make no mistake about that. Our own infinite consciousness is the evidence of the substance of that which we call money. There is no material money, you know. Money is wealth, that's true. Wealth, one aspect of wealth. But that which is called money is not matter. That which is called money is that which is that is consciousness in that form, you might say, that seems necessary at the moment, that seems essential to our completeness. We know our own consciousness is the intelligent activity of the perfect business. We know our own consciousness is the intelligent activity of the perfect performance or the perfect function of our substance in form. It doesn't make any difference. You take such a thing as, oh, let's go to the universe again. You can take this infinite consciousness that sees itself functioning so beautifully as the perfect orderly universe, the harmonious universe, the harmony that is love as this universe. You can bring this right to this so-called Earth planet and see it functioning, see our own consciousness functioning so intelligently and so perfectly, so harmoniously as this Earth planet itself. When we see it as it is, we get a hint of it in the fact that the tides come right on the dot. They know exactly the moment that the tides are coming in. And there are so many ways in which it's so obvious that there is perfect order, perfect intelligence in action, in the regular orbiting of our Earth planet, in the way it turns on its axis. Oh, there are many ways in which this is seen and known. Now we can bring this right into our homes, and you know that in any home of one who is an enlightened student of the ultimate, you're going to find order, you're going to find peace, you're going to find love, you're going to find harmony, you're going to find intelligence in action. Well, now it might look like a home, for instance, that was a house of matter and that had material furnishings and that kind of thing, books and records and all that goes along with it. But actually, these things that seem material are not really matter at all. They're all essential to the orderly beauty and the harmony and the joy of the home itself. But they are not matter. But nonetheless, when we see the evidence as it really is, when we see with the single eye, when we see with the vision infinite, we see the actual substance that comprises all of these so-called things that comprises this evidence of perfect order and of perfect activity. It takes activity to have perfect order. It takes intelligent activity in order that order be a perfect and harmonious. Now you can bring this right to your body, and you can see that, as you've seen with the universe, the earth planet, the home, you can see, well, first before the body, you can take it into your business. And you can see any business requires intelligent activity. Any business that is successful must be an orderly business. We don't deal with organization, of course, but it does have to be orderly business because order is a truth. Order is true. Order is present infinitely and everywhere in and as this universe. So any business has to be intelligently, orderly, functioning. It's infinite intelligence functioning as that business. Now let's consider the home, or the body, rather. This very same thing is true regarding the body. The very same truth is true. You could consider the body as you would the home. It has form, and certain it is that it is beautifully furnished with everything that is essential to its complete and intelligent functioning. Now, it might appear that all that is included as the completeness of the body might be considered to be organs of matter, or hands of matter, or eyes of matter, or whatnot. It makes no difference. Might be called cells or atoms. It doesn't make any difference what the names for these things may be, how many letters they string together for them, or what they dream about them might seem to be. Actually, everything that is necessary to the complete and perfect functioning of the body is present and is in full and complete evidence. And believe me, there is nothing absent that is necessary to the complete and perfect functioning, the intelligent functioning of the body, and there is nothing that can be added. Now, this is particularly fine to realize if there seems to be a growth or something like that, attempting to be evident in or as the body. But nothing can possibly be added to the complete intelligent consciousness, the substance, the activity that is functioning so beautifully and so perfectly as the body itself. Now, the eye that is single can see all of this and does see it, perceives the activity, perceives the perfect intelligent activity, perceives the perfect consciousness that is the substance and intelligent functioning, fulfilling its purpose, you see. I often think of Jesus when he was asked to cleanse the leper, and he just said, "I will, be thou clean." It was as simple as that. And what did he see there? Did he see the evidence of a leprous body, that something had to be done about that body in order to make it clean? No. Jesus saw the evidence of perfection. He saw the evidence of perfect, pure, untarnished, unblemished substance as that particular body, and that's all that Jesus did see, you see. Now, he had to see this as the illumined vision that he was and is, for that matter. This same thing is true of the man with the withered hand, you know. Now, that withered hand, that false evidence called a withered hand, must have looked very real to those standing round about, but Jesus didn't make anything of that. He didn't even say, "I'll heal your hand." Certainly he didn't say, I'll give you a treatment. What he did say was, stretch forth thine hand. What's to stop you, he might as well have said. What did Jesus see there but the evidence of perfection, of perfect substance. He saw only the evidence of that which did exist. And now I'm going to say something that I think it might be well for you to contemplate, and contemplate deeply. What Jesus was really seeing there as that man with the so-called withered hand, what Jesus was really seeing there, he knew to be his own consciousness in form. He knew that the consciousness he was not withered. He knew that because the consciousness he was the evidence of complete, eternal, infinite perfection, that the only substance in form that could be in his consciousness, or rather that he could be conscious of, he had to be conscious of being. And this did not in any way intrude upon the identity of the man who, for a little second, seemed to have a withered hand. Now, as I say, I think this would be well to contemplate, because actually all we ever see, and we are particularly aware of this in illumination, all we ever see is our own consciousness, whether we see it in form, or whether we see it as activity, whether we see it as color, or beauty, or hear it, or whatever. It is our own consciousness, the consciousness we are, and we are aware of this. Consider this, contemplate this, and see what reveals itself within your own consciousness. Yes, indeed, we do know that our own consciousness is the evidence of the substance called wealth. We know our own consciousness is the intelligent activity of the perfect business, of the perfect performance, yes, even of the perfect home and of the perfect body. Do you see what we're realizing here? We are seeing that we are the evidence of all we seem to have been seeking to make evident. We, our consciousness, is the substance and the form and the activity of all the perfect evidence that we seem to have been trying to make evident. Now, how far away from you is the evidence of that which you seem to be seeking? Our consciousness is the substance of the evidence. Our consciousness is the form of the evidence. Our consciousness in action is the activity of the evidence. Our consciousness is the awareness of the evidence. Our consciousness is the seeing of the evidence. Our consciousness is the being of the evidence. Our consciousness is the activity of the evidence. Now, for years we've been saying that God is this or God is that, but what good is it for God to be it if we are not aware that we are it? Not at all. Not one bit. We must have the evidence. We must see the evidence of the truth we've been saying. Yes, indeed. If you can see that you are infinite consciousness and that nothing exists outside of or other than your consciousness, you will see that your consciousness itself is the evidence of what is right in and as your completeness, of what is right, you understand, of that which is perfect. This means your complete, successful fulfillment of God's purpose in being you. Now, of course, we've been dwelling quite a lot upon the fact that each one of us is infinite, is the infinite presence itself. Now, we realize that we are the only power, just as we realize that we are the only presence. You see, it is because we know that we are the only presence, or just that which is present, that we can realize that we are the only power. Being infinite, we know that we are the only presence. How could there be another presence in infinity but infinity? Being the only presence, we know that we are the only power. How could anything be power that had no presence, that was not present at all? Now this is why we can say, and say with such power and authority, I am the presence of the power of God. I am the presence of the perfection that is God. Now, of course, it is true that everyone can say this and be telling the truth, for this is a wonderful statement of truth. But so long as one is not conscious of what he genuinely is, he couldn't realize the infinity of his being. In fact, he wouldn't even understand the words. Oh, he might even think that we were fit subjects to be locked up, you know. So in order to really know how great and limitless we are, we must be conscious of what we are. Not only that, we must be conscious of all that we are. Now this is why the word consciousness is so very important. Actually, the whole universe, as we've stated before, is composed of consciousness. It is the consciousness which is God being conscious. Now, because there is nothing but God existing, this universe has to be composed of God being conscious of himself. There is nothing else in this universe for God to know. And certainly there is nothing in this universe that God does not know. So this universe has to be composed of God being conscious of himself. Consciousness is indivisible, and as we know very well, it is without lines of demarcation, lines of separation. Now we are conscious, and we know that we have to be conscious in order to know that we exist. But because there is no division, no line of demarcation in consciousness, the consciousness we are cannot be divided. Thus, we are infinite consciousness. You see, we're not partial consciousness. We're not a part of God. So many times I hear someone say, well, I know that I am a part of God. My goodness, but that is a misstatement. No one is a part of God. Who could imagine that God parted himself into little particles of himself in order to identify himself? No, God is the indivisible one. But knowing that we are infinite consciousness, we are conscious of being infinite. Now you see, what we're doing here is to experience fuller illumination, greater enlightenment. Now, being conscious of being infinite consciousness, we're aware that we are the infinite presence. The infinite presence is the only presence. Thus, the infinite presence is the only power. Now, here again, you can see why it is so necessary to start first always with the infinity that is this universe, for this is your infinite presence. And because it is your infinite presence, it is the infinite power that you are. Oh, there is infinite power in this realization. Now, this is why we are aware of what we are. And this is why we can truthfully say, I am the infinite presence. I am the infinite power. And we more than say it. We more than say it. We know it. Why? Because we know why we are all of this. Oh, that word why. That's important. We can say, the power I am is in the fact of my knowing what I am. This knowing is consciousness being conscious or aware of being what it is. You know, isn't it a wonderful thing that your consciousness of what you are is God being conscious of what God is? Isn't this tremendous to realize? Ponder this. Consider it. Now, we spoke of the fact that this universe is composed of God consciousness, and that God, being all, could only be conscious of what He is. Now, our whole complete being is composed of consciousness. Consciousness is the only substance. Consciousness is all that is present. And because the consciousness we are is all, we can only be conscious of what we are. Don't you see what this means? This means that we cannot be conscious of imperfection. We cannot be conscious of a flaw, not one tiniest flaw in the infinite consciousness that we are. We cannot be conscious of hate, of injustice, of lack, of anything that is not God being conscious of what God is. Now, there's power in this. There's terrific, tremendous power in this. There can be no consciousness of what is not. There can be no consciousness of that which does not exist. We can never be conscious of what we are not, any more than God can be conscious of what God is not. Is this practical? Yes. Let's see why it is practical. We spoke of the fact that it was no help to anyone to be what he is unless he was conscious of the infinity of his being. Now, every day we're faced with some appearance of inharmony. It may appear to be illness, it may appear to be dishonesty or stupidity or injustice or hate. It may appear to be resentment, or it may appear to be any other appearance of something that is not God or good. Now, knowing that we, even as God, can only be conscious of what we are, we can clearly see that we really have no awareness of what we are not. I know of no truth that is so fraught with power as is the realization that I cannot be conscious of what I am not. Consider this. In other words, our consciousness of what we are is the power. This is what I'm saying. Your consciousness of being what you are is the power. Now, isn't this pretty practical? Indeed it is. Jesus was never conscious of seeing a withered hand. His consciousness could not possibly be aware of a withered hand. Jesus could only be conscious of what Jesus was. I'm not talking about a human being named Jesus. I'm talking about the infinite, eternal identity that was for a little split second in eternity called Jesus. But oh, this infinite consciousness that he was and that he is right now. Why, this consciousness was never aware of a withered hand because he could only be conscious of the perfection, the infinite, eternal, unbroken, unblemished, uncontaminated, unwithered perfection that he was, that was composed, you see. He knew that hand was composed of his own consciousness. But Jesus knew that the consciousness which was the substance of the hand was the same indivisible consciousness that was his awareness of the hand. In other words, he knew it was his own consciousness. That hand was comprised of his own consciousness. Now, of course, the man who seemed to have a withered hand was and is a specific identity. Jesus knew this too. He spoke to him, but he could only exist, this so-called man with a withered hand, this one could only exist because he was consciousness. There was no line of demarcation separating the consciousness of Jesus from the hand. The consciousness of Jesus and the consciousness of the so-called man, including his hand, were the same undivided consciousness. This indivisible consciousness was the substance of the hand that appeared to be withered. Thus Jesus' consciousness of being the very substance of that hand was evidenced, here's your evidence, evidenced as the perfect hand, which it had been all the while, all the while. Jesus did not visualize a perfect hand. My goodness, he knew better than that. He didn't give a treatment to a man or to a hand. Jesus didn't do anything, don't you see? Well, what happened then? Jesus, being aware that the presence of conscious perfection was the very substance of all form, could not be conscious of the presence of imperfection. He could not be conscious of what he was not. Now, I've dwelt on this at quite some length, but for a very good reason. And it is because, as I said before, it is fraught with power. It is powerful, this realization that you cannot be aware of anything that is not composed and comprised of your own consciousness. You cannot be aware of any activity that is not your own infinite God consciousness in action. You know, I cannot leave this stupendous subject without going farther into it. It is so simple and so beautiful and so powerful to realize the full implication of this. For instance, suppose some problem should be presented to you. It doesn't have to be a withered hand. Suppose it might seem to be a crippled condition, or suppose it might seem to be a blemish on the face, or suppose it might seem to be a sick body, or a man or a woman in mental trouble, or a lack of supply, or anything. It makes no difference what it is, or what it might claim to be. Why, it's so simple and so beautiful and so powerful to simply realize, well, look, there is but one conscious I. I am this conscious I. But this one is this same conscious I that I am. Now, I am not conscious of a blemish. I am not conscious of this so-called condition. And because I am the same I that this one is, and this one is the same I that I am, this one cannot be conscious of anything that I am not conscious of being. Don't you see, in this way, there is no separation. You realize that there is no separation between the so-called patient and the so-called practitioner, or the wrong name for it, of course, is healer. But truly, it is in the realization, it makes no difference whether the difficulty might seem to be lack or a mental difficulty or a heartbreak or whatever. If you just stop to realize that even though this one is a specific identity, this one is exactly the same conscious identity that you are, the same conscious I identified that you are. Now, when I spoke of identity just now, I meant the infinite one, all identity, which is identified as every identity in existence. But if you can just realize that you are the one I This one is the one I, and only what is known to be, what this one I knows itself to be, can be known by you, by the I that you are, by the infinite I that that one is. And then you will perceive so clearly that there is no separation in consciousness, no division. Oh, you can begin to see now, I know, how powerful and how instantaneous this is, how instantaneous the evidence is, because this has nothing to do with visualizing or doing mental work or giving a treatment. This is just, a consciousness is conscious right now, don't you see? Conscious is conscious of being the evidence right now. So there's no time element. There's no element of separation, no line of demarcation. There is nothing that can be known by the I that has called upon you, who seem just for a split second to need help, and the I that you are. Oh, indeed, it is powerful. Indeed, it is all the power there is. It is recorded in the Bible that Jesus spoke of healing, and perhaps he did. No doubt he had to use words that the unenlightened would understand. But Jesus knew that the only healing there could be would have to be simply an opening of their eyes in order that they might see the perfection in form that was right before their vision. Jesus actually saw what was already there. Now here is Jesus' explanation as to why the people, as he called them, seem to be in such great difficulty and seem to be experiencing experiences that are not genuine or real at all. And here I quote, "For this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For verily I say unto you, that many prophets and righteous men have desired to see these things which you see, and have not seen them, and to hear those things which you hear, and have not heard them." That's Matthew 13:15 through 17. Yes, Jesus said, the people's heart. Now what is the heart? The heart is conscious love. The people's heart is waxed gross. Yes, the seeming illusion of birth does appear to present further grossness. He did not personalize this. He didn't say the people's heart singular, is waxed gross. The people's hearts, he said, is waxed gross. He meant that the mass illusion seemed real. Mass illusion, you understand. He meant that the mass illusion of birth meant a mass illusion of man with breath in his nostrils. He knew that this mass illusion meant grossness, meant materiality. It meant that the meaning of love was misinterpreted to be an urge to create. It meant that this mistaken sense of love was the reason for the appearance of gross bodies, or bodies of matter. And remember, I said appearance of gross bodies, or bodies of matter, when actually there are no bodies of matter, for there is no matter. Jesus meant that the very bodies composed of eternal spirit, consciousness, light, were being misinterpreted and were being misperceived or seen falsely. They were mistakenly seen to be perishable bodies, to be bodies of matter. Yes, he said, for the people's heart, not hearts, but heart. This means that the one consciousness of all of us had appeared to be unconscious of what we genuinely are. Yes, the people's heart is waxed gross, become materialized, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they do seem to have closed. Yes, the illusory ear of matter cannot even hear the Word of God. Oh, it takes the consciousness that is God to hear the Word of God, just as much as it takes the consciousness that is God to speak the Word of God. The materialistic illusion of ears cannot hear the voice of God. And when we seem to be seeing matter, or when we seem to be seeing any of them, the conditions of matter, we really have closed our eyes, you know. Closed our eyes in sleep, to dream, to dream. Birth does this, you know. That illusion called birth, a beginning. It is a born body that seems to have eyes of matter, that sees matter. It is as though the illusion of birth caused a false covering over the whole face of the earth, making everything appear different than it really is. Oh, how deluded, how illusory. This is what Sir Arthur Eddington was so puzzled about when he said that something happened between our seeing of a thing and the thing itself that transformed, and transformed is his word, transformed its appearance. Yes, the illusion called birth seems to have dulled our hearing and closed our eyes to the glory of God, to the kingdom of heaven that is right here, and furthermore, that is all that is here. Oh yes, perfection can be heard, you know, just as well as seen. And the beauty that is this universe can be heard as well as seen. You know, there is a new book out called Music of the Spheres, and I think it's a wonderful book, a wonderful thing that this book has come out. I think it might not be realized completely that there is such a thing as music of the spheres if it were not for this book, written by one, as I understand it, who doesn't even claim to be a metaphysician or a truth student. But nonetheless, there is such a thing as music of divine, infinite music, and it has been heard by many, and it beggars description. There is no so-called human music made by so-called instruments, material instruments, or even by the instrument called the voice, that can begin to approach the beauty of the music of the spheres. It is indeed heavenly. If it's like millions and billions of birds, it's indescribable, of course, but all singing and in the most beautiful tones. Well, I won't try to describe it, but it's wonderful when you hear it. And I can say this, that the only reason we don't hear it is because our ears we seem to have closed at birth. Then Jesus goes on to say, lest at any time they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and should understand with their heart. Now remember, the heart is consciousness. Should understand with the consciousness that they are, rather than with the so-called human mind. And then he says that I should heal them. Isn't it clear here that Jesus knew the only healing there could be was to see, to hear, and to be conscious of what is right here? Well then, healing isn't exactly the right word, is it? There is great spiritual significance in Jesus' statement that we should understand with our heart. To understand anything is to know what it is. to know what constitutes its substance. If we're going to understand anything, we've got to know what constitutes its substance. We have to be conscious of what constitutes its activity. And most important of all, to understand anything is to be conscious of why it is what it is. Isn't this exactly what you are beginning to perceive right here and right now? Aren't you beginning to understand with the heart, the consciousness, what constitutes the substance and the activity of everything you see? And aren't you beginning to understand why everything you see is what it is? Aren't you hearing, as the one infinite consciousness, hearing its own words? Indeed you are. You are hearing your own words of truth. Aren't you even hearing the one infinite voice, knowing that it is our voice, your voice, my voice, actually the voice of everyone, though they may not seem to know it. It's the voice of God.
I hope you enjoy this spiritual audio. Like, share and subscribe for more.